Hello, how are you today? And are you ready to hear mysteries? If you're ready, I'll tell you.
Night 1, The Arrival. The year was 1944, and the Pacific theater of World War II was in its most intense phase. American and Japanese forces clashed ferociously over strategic points, one of which was an isolated bunker on a small island. This bunker, once a critical stronghold, had become a somber relic of past battles. It bore the scars of fierce combat, with bullet-riddled walls and the remains of a brutal struggle where many soldiers had perished. The air around it was thick with the sense of unease and foreboding. A platoon of 15 American soldiers was assigned to reinforce this bunker. The journey to the bunker was grueling, involving days of trudging through dense jungle, wary of ambushes and hostile forces. They were led by Sergeant James Thompson, a seasoned veteran known for his sharp instincts and leadership. The platoon consisted of various men, each with their own reasons for being there, united by the camaraderie forged in the fires of war. As they approached the bunker, the soldiers couldn't shake off a feeling of dread that seemed to seep from the very ground. The entrance was half collapsed, and the interior was dark and musty, filled with the remnants of the previous occupants' last stand. The walls bore dark stains, and broken equipment lay scattered around, a silent testament to the fierce battle that had taken place. Sergeant Thompson gave the order to secure the area. "All right, men, spread out and check the perimeter. I want this place fortified before nightfall." The men moved quickly, setting up defenses and checking their weapons. Corporal Bill Anderson and Private Mike Davis were assigned the first night watch. As dusk settled, a sense of unease crept over the soldiers. The jungle around them seemed to grow darker and more oppressive, the usual sounds of wildlife eerily absent. "Feels like a tomb," Anderson muttered to Davis as they took their positions at the entrance. Davis nodded, his eyes scanning the darkening jungle. "Yeah, like something's watching us." The night deepened, and the soldiers tried to keep themselves occupied. They knew the importance of staying alert, but the oppressive silence and the memories of the bunker's bloody history weighed heavily on them. Hours passed with nothing but the occasional rustle of leaves or distant call of a nightbird to break the silence. Anderson and Davis kept their vigil, their senses on high alert. The moonlight cast eerie shadows, making the jungle seem alive with unseen movements. Suddenly, Davis froze, his eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" Anderson turned, listening intently. Faint whispers seemed to drift through the air, barely audible, but unmistakable. They sounded like the voices of men in pain, distant and ghostly. "Yeah," Anderson whispered back, gripping his rifle tighter. "I hear it." The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to come from all around, echoing off the bunker's walls. Anderson tried to radio for help, but all he received was static. Panic began to set in as the shadows seemed to close in on them. Davis looked around, his face pale. "What the hell is going on?" Before Anderson could respond, ghostly apparitions began to materialize. They were faint at first, like misty figures emerging from the darkness. But as they grew closer, their forms became more defined. They were soldiers, both American and Japanese, their faces twisted in agony and sorrow. Some bore horrific wounds. Others looked like they had been caught in the midst of a violent struggle. Anderson and Davis could only stare in horror as the apparitions approached. The whispers became clearer, revealing snatches of desperate last words and cries for help. One ghost, an American soldier with a gaping wound in his chest, reached out towards Anderson. "Help us," the ghost whispered, his voice filled with anguish. "We can't leave." Anderson felt a chill run down his spine. He backed away, trying to stay calm, but the sight of the ghostly soldiers was too much. Davis, unable to handle the terror, collapsed, fainting on the spot. The apparitions continued to close in, their spectral hands reaching out. Anderson, feeling a surge of panic, stumbled back and fell. The ghosts surrounded him, their hollow eyes staring into his soul. Just as he thought he would be overwhelmed, A blinding light filled the bunker. The ghosts recoiled, their forms dissolving into mist. The light came from the rising sun, its rays breaking through the dense jungle and illuminating the bunker. As the morning light grew stronger, the apparitions faded away, leaving Anderson trembling and disoriented. The rest of the platoon found Anderson and Davis shortly after sunrise. Anderson was babbling incoherently about ghosts, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. Davis was still unconscious, lying on the cold floor of the bunker. Sergeant Thompson and the other soldiers gathered around, trying to make sense of what had happened. They had all heard stories of haunted battlefields and restless spirits, but seeing their comrades in such a state was deeply unsettling. "Get them some water," Thompson ordered. "We need to figure out what happened here." As the soldiers tended to Anderson and Davis, the rest of the platoon couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The bunker, once a place of strategic importance, now felt like a cursed relic of the past. Thompson looked around, his mind racing. He knew they had a mission to complete, but the events of the night had shaken him to the core. The bunker was supposed to be a place of refuge and defense, but it had become a prison of nightmares. Anderson eventually regained some of his composure, though his hands still shook and his eyes darted nervously around the bunker. "Sarge," he said, his voice trembling. "There were ghosts, soldiers, they were all around us." Thompson nodded, though he was skeptical. "Take it easy, Anderson. We'll get to the bottom of this." As the day wore on, the soldiers fortified the bunker and prepared for the next night. They set up extra lanterns and made sure their weapons were ready. Despite their efforts to stay busy, the memory of the ghostly apparitions lingered, casting a shadow over their spirits. The night came swiftly, bringing with it a sense of impending dread. The soldiers knew that whatever haunted the bunker was not done with them. They braced themselves for another night of horror, hoping that they could survive until dawn. Night 2, the shadows. After the harrowing events of the previous night, the soldiers spent the day trying to fortify the bunker and fortify their nerves. The stories from Anderson and Davis were met with a mixture of fear and skepticism. Some soldiers believed that the horrors of war had simply gotten to them, while others were convinced that something supernatural was at play. Sergeant Thompson knew that maintaining morale was critical, so he ordered everyone to stay busy and focus. Despite the unsettling experience, not everyone was convinced. Private Tom Larson and Private John Evans, who were assigned to the second night watch, dismissed the ghost stories as nonsense. Larson, a burly man with a confident demeanor, scoffed at the notion of ghosts. "Come on, John," Larson said as they prepared for their shift. "You don't really believe in that ghost crap, do you?" Anderson and Davis just got spooked by their own shadows. Evans, a more cautious and quiet soldier, shrugged. "I don't know, Tom. They seem pretty shaken up. But yeah, maybe it was just their imaginations running wild." The two soldiers took their positions as the night descended upon the jungle once more. The darkness seemed thicker, the silence more oppressive. The flickering lanterns cast eerie shadows that danced on the bunker walls, amplifying the sense of foreboding. "Let's just get through this shift and prove to everyone that there's nothing to be afraid of," Larson said, trying to sound confident. Hours passed in uneasy silence. Larson and Evans kept themselves alert, occasionally making small talk to break the tension. The jungle around them was deathly quiet, the usual sounds of nocturnal creatures strangely absent. Suddenly, Evans noticed something out of the corner of his eye. A shadow moved, but there was no one there to cast it. He turned to Larson, his voice trembling slightly. "Did you see that?" Larson laughed, though it sounded forced. "It's just your imagination. Man, relax." But the shadows continued to move, growing bolder and more defined. The temperature in the bunker dropped suddenly, and a cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing one of the lanterns. The remaining light cast long, flickering shadows that seemed to writhe and twist on the walls. "Okay, maybe this place is a bit creepy," Larson admitted, his bravado faltering. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent than the previous night. They echoed through the bunker, filling the air with a sense of despair and pain. This time, the whispers were accompanied by soft, ghostly moans and the distant sound of gunfire, as if the battle was still raging on another plane. Evan's eyes widened in fear. "Tom, we need to get out of here. Now." Before Larson could respond, the shadows began to take on more defined forms. Ghostly figures of soldiers, both American and Japanese, emerged from the darkness. Their faces were contorted in agony, their eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. They reached out with spectral hands, their movements slow and deliberate. Larson and Evans backed away, their hearts pounding in their chests. The ghosts surrounded them, their hollow eyes fixed on the living soldiers. One of the apparitions, a Japanese soldier with a bayonet wound in his side, stepped forward. "Why do we fight?" the ghost whispered in a hollow voice, his expression one of eternal sorrow. Larson, his hands shaking, tried to respond but found himself speechless. The ghosts continued to advance, their whispers growing louder, filling the air with an unbearable sense of loss and regret. Evans grabbed Larson's arm, his voice barely a whisper. "We need to move. Now." They tried to make their way to the exit, but the ghosts blocked their path. The spectral soldiers seemed to grow more solid with each passing moment, their eyes burning with a strange, otherworldly light. The whispers turned into wails, a cacophony of pain and anguish that echoed through the bunker. Larson, driven to the brink of madness, raised his rifle and fired at the apparitions. The bullets passed through the ghosts harmlessly, but the sound of gunfire seemed to anger them. The ghosts lunged forward, their hands reaching out with a desperate, almost tangible need. Just as the apparitions were about to overwhelm them, a blinding light filled the bunker. The first light of dawn had broken through, casting its rays over the jungle and into the bunker. The ghosts recoiled from the light, their forms dissolving into mist and shadows. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the temperature began to rise. Larson and Evans stumbled out of the bunker, their faces pale and their bodies trembling. The rest of the platoon, awakened by the gunfire, rushed to meet them. Sergeant Thompson took one look at their faces and knew something terrible had happened. What the hell happened in there? Larson, his voice shaky, managed to speak. "Ghosts ... they were everywhere. We couldn't stop them." Evans nodded, his eyes wide with fear. "It's real, Sarge. This place is haunted." Thompson sighed, his mind racing. The stories were true, and whatever haunted the bunker was not something they could fight with bullets and bravery. They needed to figure out a way to survive, and possibly put the restless spirits to rest. As the day wore on, the soldiers gathered, sharing their fears and experiences. The skepticism that had been present the previous night was gone, replaced by a shared sense of dread. They knew that the next night would bring more horrors, and they needed to be prepared. Thompson gathered his men. "All right, listen up. We need to stick together and find a way to deal with this. We'll set up extra lights, stay in pairs, and keep our eyes open. Whatever happens, we face it together." The men nodded, their faces grim. They spent the day fortifying the bunker further, setting up additional lanterns and preparing for another night of terror. The memory of the ghostly soldiers lingered, casting a shadow over their spirits. As night fell once again, the soldiers braced themselves for what was to come. They knew that whatever haunted the bunker would return, and they needed to be ready. The jungle around them seemed to close in, the darkness thicker and more oppressive than ever. The second night had revealed the true horror of the bunker, and the soldiers were about to face an even greater challenge. The spirits of the past were restless, and their presence would not be easily banished. The men prepared themselves, knowing that the battle for their sanity and survival was just beginning. Night 3, the final confrontation. The soldiers spent the third day in a tense state of preparation. The ghostly encounters of the previous two nights had shaken their confidence and morale. They worked tirelessly to reinforce their defenses, setting up additional lights and fortifying their positions. Conversations were hushed, and every rustle of the jungle foliage made them jumpy. Sergeant Thompson held a meeting to strategize for the night ahead. The plan was simple: maintain strong lighting, stay in pairs, and keep the radio communication open at all times. They hoped that the combined strength of their unity and light would fend off the spirits. As night fell, a heavy silence descended upon the bunker. The darkness seemed to pulse with a life of its own, thicker and more malevolent than before. The soldiers' nerves were on edge, but they steeled themselves for what was to come. Private Michael Harris and Private David Parker, the most skeptical of the group, were assigned to the first watch. Despite their bravado, they couldn't hide the unease that crept into their voices as they took their positions at the bunker's entrance. "Stay sharp," Parker, Harris whispered, his eyes scanning the shadowy jungle. "We've got this," Parker nodded, though his grip on his rifle tightened. "Yeah, just shadows and wind." The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. The jungle was eerily silent, and the tension was palpable. The soldiers inside the bunker tried to rest, but found little comfort in the dim light of the lanterns. It wasn't long before the temperature dropped sharply, a familiar prelude to the night's horrors. The lanterns flickered, their flames struggling against an unseen force. Harris and Parker exchanged nervous glances, but held their ground. The whispers began anew, louder and more insistent than before. They seemed to come from all directions, echoing off the bunker walls. The voices of long-dead soldiers filled the air with their desperate pleas and anguished cries. Harris tried to radio for help, but only static answered him. Out of the corner of his eye, Parker saw movement. Ghostly figures emerged from the darkness, their forms more defined and numerous than the previous nights. American and Japanese soldiers, their spectral bodies bearing the marks of violent death, advanced towards the bunker. "Here they come," Parker whispered, his voice trembling. The ghosts moved with purpose, their eyes glowing with an unearthly light. They seemed more corporeal, more solid than before. Harris and Parker backed away, their hearts pounding. "Stand your ground," Harris shouted, though his voice betrayed his fear. The ghosts surrounded them, their hollow eyes fixed on the living soldiers. One apparition, an American soldier with a bayonet wound through his chest, stepped forward. "What do we fight?" the ghost asked, his voice a mournful echo. Harris, despite his terror, tried to respond. "We don't want to fight. We're just trying to survive." The ghost's expression softened, but the sorrow in his eyes remained. "We cannot rest. The battle never ends." Before Harris could say more, the ghost lunged forward. Harris and Parker fired their rifles, but the bullets passed harmlessly through the apparitions. The spectral soldiers reached out with icy hands, their touch freezing and numbing. Inside the bunker, the other soldiers heard the commotion. Sergeant Thompson and the rest of the platoon rushed to the entrance, weapons ready. They were met with a horrifying sight: Harris and Parker, surrounded by ghosts, their faces pale and eyes wide with terror. "Fall back," Thompson ordered. "Everyone, fall back inside." The soldiers retreated into the bunker, the ghosts in close pursuit. The lanterns inside flickered violently, casting erratic shadows on the walls. The temperature continued to plummet, and the whispers grew into a cacophony of wails and cries. "Form a perimeter," Thompson shouted, trying to maintain order. "Keep the lights steady." The soldiers formed a defensive circle, their backs against the cold stone walls. The ghosts pressed in from all sides, their spectral forms flickering in and out of focus. The air was thick with the smell of decay and the metallic tang of blood. As the apparitions closed in, Thompson remembered something he had read about restless spirits. They were often bound to the place where they had died, trapped by unfinished business or unresolved emotions. He realized that they needed to find a way to give these spirits peace if they were to survive the night. "We need to find out what they want," Thompson said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "There's got to be something keeping them here." Corporal Bill Anderson, still shaken from his encounter on the first night, stepped forward. "Maybe it's the battle. They can't let go of the fight." Thompson nodded, We need to show them that the war is over. With no other options, Thompson took a deep breath and stepped towards the advancing ghosts. He held up his hands in a gesture of peace. Listen to me. The war is over. You don't have to fight anymore. The ghosts paused, their movements slowing. The wails and whispers quieted, replaced by a tense silence. One ghost, an American officer with a deep gash across his face, stepped forward. His hollow eyes bored into Thompson's. How do we know? The ghost asked, his voice a haunting echo. Thompson swallowed hard. I swear to you, the war is over. You can rest now. You don't have to keep fighting. The ghost officer seemed to consider this. The other apparitions watched, their expressions a mix of hope and sorrow. Slowly, the officer nodded. If what you say is true, then we can finally find peace. Thompson took a deep breath. Yes, you can go home. The ghost officer turned to the other spirits. The war is over. We can rest. A murmur of relief swept through the spectral ranks. The ghosts began to fade, their forms dissolving into mist and shadows. The temperature in the bunker rose, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The soldiers watched in awe as the apparitions disappeared, leaving behind a profound silence. As dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight pierced the gloom, illuminating the bunker with a warm, golden light. The soldiers, exhausted and shaken, emerged into the morning air, grateful to be alive. Sergeant Thompson gathered his men. We made it. We survived. The soldiers nodded, their faces reflecting a mix of relief and lingering fear. They had faced the horrors of the past and lived to tell the tale. The bunker, once a place of death and despair, now felt like a sanctuary. As they prepared to leave, Thompson took one last look at the bunker. He knew that the spirits of the fallen soldiers had finally found peace, and that the horrors of the past had been laid to rest. The platoon moved out, leaving the haunted bunker behind. They carried with them the memories of the nights spent in terror, but also the knowledge that they had helped to end the suffering of those trapped between worlds. The jungle around them seemed less oppressive, the sunlight brighter. The war was far from over, but they had won a small, significant victory in a battle that transcended the physical realm. As they marched on, Sergeant Thompson felt a sense of closure. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, bound by the shared experience of those harrowing nights. And though they would continue to fight in the days to come, they carried with them the knowledge that even in the darkest places, there was hope for redemption and peace.
Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of darkness. If you enjoyed this tale, please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more chilling stories of the unknown.